Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good rest after such a fantastic dinner. Thank you very much to the university. As Bella has explained already, that today I'd like to elaborate a little bit more about the value of census as a source of migration statistics. Yesterday, I introduced other type of the sources, but we are trying to stress that census is probably the most comprehensive, important, key source of information if you want to do the analysis on migration and migrants and why. But I want to start, and at the beginning, I really want you to know about the census. Census is the probably most important, certainly, and expensive and serious statistical activities of for any country in terms of the magnitude and also the money they put in. And I want you to know that actually census activities has been orchestrated at the global level by United Nations for more than half century. United Nations has been promoting the census quite vigorously since the, I think, early 50s, because UN considered census, population housing census, is very, very useful, important tool if you think about development planning, and the information we get from the census can be used effectively for decision making, any policy making. And also, therefore, UN has been promoting and asking every country to conduct a census at least once in 10 years. And preferably that year which end either 0 or 1 to make a consistency in terms of the reference period. And furthermore, UN come up with a recommendation of the minimum set of so-called core questions and encouraging countries to include, so that outcome of the census in terms of content should be comparable among countries. So these features of the censuses at the global level really add to the value of the data generated by census, including migration statistics. Here, just what's going on for the last round of census program. As I said, that the UN is recommending every country to take a population census once in 10 years. And between last 10 years, between 2005 and 2014, 214 countries in the world have already taken the census, which covers as much as like 93% of the world population. And here's the timing that census took place. A lot of census took place either 2010 and 2011. We wanted to see the peak in the 2010, but many countries delayed the census by 1 year, so that resulted in this peak in 2011. And also many European countries trying to harmonize the timing of the census take place in 2011. So this is just the background information, but I just want you to know there's a coordination mechanism at the global level when and how census should take place, and also the efforts to harmonize a question to be included that really contributed to the value of the census data and the statistics generated to make information very comparable, and also timing-wise it's very comparable too. So I said that UN is recommending minimum set of questions to be included in every census in every countries. When it comes to migration, there are 3 key core topics that UN is encouraging for the inclusion, which is country of birth, a country of citizenship, and also the timing of the person who arrived in the country. So they ask a question about when they come to this country for the first time, or sometimes they ask specifically in which year they arrived. So they try to capture the timing of the person who arrived in the country, and these are core questions. So for those who already participated in the census, in the last census, you may recall some questions are like that. They directly ask the question, where you're born, or then you have to choose which country. And also, this is a good question, example of questions, how the country ask the timing or the year or period of arrival. Just go back quickly, on time is limited. So these three questions, the core question, encouraged to be included in a census. This is just the snapshot of how many countries actually did ask that question in the last census. And as you can see, quite a large number of countries managed to include in this question of the country of birth, a country of citizenship, and the year period of arrival. Like for instance, country of birth, I think more than 100 countries had a question, and also even citizenship, I think close to, sorry, I can see like 100, again, over 100 countries had included a question, which allow us to calculate the size of the migrant stock in a country. There's other questions, of course, depending on countries. Some countries which are interested in knowing migration, they keep adding different questions. But the point I want to make is there's an increasing number of countries which try to capture immigration, not immigration, immigration by adding question to the censuses. You can see that. So this has been already mentioned, so I won't take time to explain. But one of the most interesting and very important thing to know is that census questions such as citizenship or the country of birth allow us to calculate the population stock. We call it migrant stock of foreign-born population, stock of foreigners, and also we can also calculate the return migrants. And if the question about the country of birth or citizenship of parents are included, we can even calculate the stock of first or second generation of the migrants. And combined with other socioeconomic variables the census captures, we can tell quite a bit about characteristics of migrants. And also by adding question of the timing of the immigration, we can really tell how much the voluminous the recent influx of population is. Again, I go quickly. Just the illustration what we can do with that information. Here's an illustration of the age distribution of native-born versus foreign-born population for the OECD countries taken all together. So it really shows compared to native-born population, the age distribution of the foreign-born population has more concentration, heavier concentration for the younger ages. And here's another useful example using a census information. Here it shows the relationship between the unemployment rate of native-born population versus foreign-born population. Obviously, that the foreign population has higher unemployment rate compared to the native-born population. I won't get into detail because just want to let you know how variable the information we gather from census are. A few words about so far, because what I've shown is the information collected through the questions targeted on immigrants. But as I said, that there's a great interest, growing interest to capture the immigration, the immigrants through the censuses. And immigration is captured in this manner, often using immigration module, household module. Census asks to list the whole member in your household, including those people who are absent in your household on the day of census, and ask them to identify among your member of the household who is absent, if this person is currently living abroad or not. Then ask when this person had left the household, and also a question going on about some demographic characteristics of those persons who left the household, and they also ask what they're sometimes doing at the destination outside the country, and why they left abroad, from the household they used to live in. So by combining and based on those set of information, you can know quite a bit about magnitude of immigration and also what they're doing ideally at the destination. Here's just some illustration. As I mentioned, mostly the immigration is captured in the so-called household module or immigration module. This is a special category, set of questions in a questionnaire. Collecting immigration through census sounds very appealing, but I think we also have to exercise with caution, because so far information is obtainable. However, when it comes to the reliability, there's always some questions. And because primarily the respondents are not immigrants themselves, and all the information about immigration or the immigrants are replied by the person who remain in households, because information is collected through proxy respondent, the family member. Always there's some margin of the unreliability of the information collected. Well, so far I've been telling about the type of questions and topics included in the census to capture either immigration or immigration. But I also want to add a few words. If you really want to use the census to capture migration or migrants, there's other consideration that you also have to bear in mind, especially in planning a census. It is very important if you're a government officer and if you're planning to conduct census in the coming years, well, in advance you need to have good, thorough campaign, making clear the census is for everyone who will be in the territory of your country, regardless of citizenship. So regardless you are migrants or not migrants, regardless your legal status in the country. So we cannot scare undocumented migrants, for instance, because they are often kind of feared, to be caught. If they answer to the question through the census, they're always kind of afraid of being caught and identified as illegal migrants. So we have to make it very clear. Census is the statistical activity. It's totally independent, separate from other type of activity. There's no way we try to identify those illegal migrants from the censuses. It's very, very important to deliver that message to the people in the country. And also, you can imagine that many migrants are not really well versed in the languages that questionnaire is formulated. So sometimes it may be important to translate the questionnaire into the other languages where many migrants are using in that country. I remember in the United States, for instance, of course, English is a common language used. But when time comes for the census, they translated the census questionnaire into almost like 20 different languages. So it's very important so that to make sure that migrants who are not really familiar with the local language should feel free to answer to these questions here. And also special efforts needs to be made in training interviewers so that interviewers who actually visit the household make sure they got a secure answer from the migrants, and also not to intimidate the migrants to answer to these questions. And last but very important point I want to mention that even in the planning stage, it's very important for the government to make a clear plan for the analysis and dissemination, especially on what information you want to prioritize in analyzing and also disseminating the result. I'm saying this because often the government authority or even people from National Statistics Office, they're not really fully aware of that some question in the questionnaire can generate information on migrants. They tend to forget, therefore, the tabulation and analysis of the question like foreign-born population or citizenship tend to be postponed, not really given a first priority in analysis. So therefore, if we really wanted to have analysis on migration from census, we need to push a little bit probably that to give some more importance in analysis of those information collected from census, and also make sure that information are analyzed and also tabulated, then have to be widely disseminated. Okay, last point that I want to let you know is that so far I'm talking about how to use a census, one census. But remind you that the census is supposed to take in place regularly every 10 years. So if that's happening, and if we could get the census data from more than one census, we can also do this exercise of estimating net international migration between censuses. It's a bit technical, so I'm putting a very simple form. And here's the equation, the very simple demographic equation, which shows how population grows between two census periods. Population between two reference period of time, let's say between 2000 and 2010, it grows, it can decline, but often it grows because of the addition of the number of people who are born in these 10 years, and also during these 10 years, people dying out, so they're plus and minus. And also in this 10-year period, people coming in and out of the country, plus minus. So if you change this formulation into this way, we can estimate net, meaning plus and minus, amount of migrants in the country by calculating the difference in population size plus birth and minus death. This is a result. So it shows the age distribution of net migrants in 10-year in the census period. And you can see the most of the migrants, in this case it's plus. I think this is an example of Australia. So the migrants are more concentrated in young period, young generation. Young people are coming more to Australia in this period. And I suspect this also another peak below 5 is that maybe children will accompany the migrants to come to Australia. So just a very simple illustration about what we can do by using census information which are available from more than one censuses. Okay, so I'd like to wrap up. We're trying to promote to use census more and more, and because this is very rich source of information. But to make it more important, I need your also assistance and help. Next peak of census is coming soon. UN is encouraging many countries to have census in the year of 2020 or 2021. So this is exactly this time many governments is now preparing for the next census. And they're really scratching their heads what question to be included or dropped in addition. So if you can voice together and let's talk to the government and make sure the topic relevant to migration be included in the next census. And also, I think I mentioned already, we also have to, pressure a little bit about all this information collected from census to be sure to be fully analyzed and evaluated and disseminated widely. And also, I think I mentioned yesterday, census, in my view, has a greater use if it can be used. It can be combined with other source of information, like a survey, even administrative data. And this has been kind of trend in the days. And many European countries now moving to this direction of integrating different data sources. And I think this is another thing that I want to see happening in the coming years. This presentation file, including others, will be eventually distributed to you according to organizer. So most of the talk that I had yesterday and today is based on this UN publication you see here. And these are available from their website, but I think it's also included in the memory stick that you received yesterday. And also very lastly, I also want to point out a very important depository of census microdata. It's called IPMAS International. They have a project to collect the sample of the raw census data, usually 5 to 10% of the census population, and collect and store in one place. I think Minnesota University is administrating this database, which is again available on the website. And researcher may benefit knowing this data source so that you can directly analyze census data from more than 80 countries. Okay, I'll stop here and give a microphone to Vera.
Thank you very much, Keiko, for that presentation. So we have about 20 minutes for discussion. What I would really like to hear from you is what are your experiences with the census? There are some participants here working in national administrations, but also from international organizations. So if you can take a minute or so to explain what is your experience with census data collection, the preparation of the census, use of census data, what's your frustration with the census data, what kind of information do you need on migration and you didn't find in the census? For example, we have a colleague here, or two colleagues from Egypt, and I think the census was held last year for the 2020 round. And a lot of data was already disseminated. Guess what? The migration data has still not been released. And so, if let's see, can you tell the colleagues, what are your experiences with the census? How is this going? What's the quality of the data? And also, as Keiko was saying, currently we're actually in the 2020 census round already, with the peak to be expected in 2020, 2021 in terms of the numbers of censuses to be conducted. Now, normally countries have a kind of a preparatory committee for the census where many agencies and national entities participate in, but also where international funders are participating in, World Bank or UNFPA or others who are taking the lead or providing technical assistance on or financial assistance on this exercise. So, who can I? Who breaks the ice? Who can I give the floor to tell us a little bit about their national or analytical experience on the census? One other? Okay, so why don't I start from that side and then I move towards the center of the room. And yes, and make sure, in fact, sorry, what we didn't do is kind of introduce ourselves, and so if you haven't taken the floor yet, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good morning, it's Rabbani speaking. I'm from University of York. Well, I have never worked any agencies or international organizations with migration, but as I was born in Bangladesh, and what I have, my thought actually, or assumptions that a lot of people actually works beyond the country, and when census data get prepared, everybody is included within that census data. So let's say about 1 million people working outside of the country after like 6 or 7 years of their life, they get counted both countries. And there's data from both countries. How can we actually adjust these numbers? And when we make a model or anything, how can we actually transform them to get a better understanding of it? Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I am Andrea Rodriguez, working for IOM in the Northern Triangle of Central America. One of the challenges that we face is to measure immigration. And in that sense, when you are asking a question in the origin country, then there is this definition of household. And in the definition of household is, where they share a roof and they share a budget. And then you're asking if in their household someone has moved, in the last 5 or 10 years, but also there is a life cycle within that household. And for example, there is family that is getting married and they form a new household, then you lose, that information on the person that emigrated because that household might not exist anymore. So how you address that?
I'm Nina. I'm from School of Geographical Sciences, University of Bristol. I have 3 questions to ask. The first one is inconsistencies between years. From my experience, I find censuses from different years, they're quite insistent. A few questions. I couldn't the data collection process wasn't that consistent, and the data itself wasn't that consistent. My second question is about the sensitivity of the data. Taking China for an example, I couldn't get any county level data, individual level data. It's quite frustrating for researchers. We're not very interested in knowing people's privacy, but it's very important for us to know more to carry out any meaningful research. My third question is about between country inconsistencies, taking Chinese census, for example. Chinese census about the migration data about in China is collected based on hukou system. It's just a unique system in China. I was wondering how what's your take and what's your advice for me to make between country comparisons based on Chinese census data? Thank you very much.
Ask for the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you. What is your advice for countries that are currently in a conflict situation? So let's take the example of Syria, that has been in a conflict for 7-8 years now. The country changed a lot during the conflict. A lot of people moved, a lot of people fled out of the country, and the last census is older than when the conflict started. The governments are suggesting to use the data from the last census, which for humanitarian assistance makes no sense because we know that the population structure and demographics change a lot. And when the UN comes up with different new population figures or statistics, it is rejected by many key players. So what is your advice or suggestion how we maybe as humanitarian partners can deal with this issue?
Hi, my name is Audrey Lenoël. I'm from the French Institute for Demographic Studies. I would have just two questions. You mentioned that, one important stake is to cover all the population, and we know that irregular migrants might be a bit wary of being enumerated in censuses. So I just wanted to know if there have been studies to know how far, to what extent actually irregular migrants are covered in different censuses. So if you have heard about studies in different countries. Another question is, I've worked with the Senegalese Statistics Institute on their census. And one thing, we're trying to do an atlas of migration in Senegal, and they were saying that the questions about immigration, about the nationality, is not necessarily very reliable. They was mentioning that many people claim to be Senegalese when they're not. They might be Guinean, they might be Gambian. So I just wanted to know whether there are studies to know whether how these questions are actually answered and how reliable questions on citizenship and nationality actually are in censuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Many of them are very, very interesting and very important questions. And thank you for asking. Where should I start? Maybe can I reverse the order in answering the questions? Reliability of the question on the citizenship. There's few technical ways to double check the reliability of information on the citizenship. They can always compare with other data sources like administrative data sources and so forth. But frankly speaking, it's very difficult evaluated by census information alone. The validity have to rely on the comparison with other data sources. Sorry, you have another question. Irregular migrants, yes, okay. The estimate of the irregular migrants and undocumented migrants. Yes, many countries has done it. I recall, for instance, the United States. They're always concerned about, to capture the magnitude of irregular migrants. But to begin with, they make a big campaign to cover everybody, to be captured by census on census date. So they even talk to the homeless people and to be, counted. Then after they catch everyone, they again use the demographic technique and comparing from the previous census information on population size. And as I displayed that they do have an estimate of the number of the births and deaths occurred in the census period, then estimation of immigration during that period. So some residual can be indicative the magnitude of irregular migration. Actually, country like United States, this is one of the main concern and subject that they wanted to reveal when each census comes, because this is a great concern to the country. So that's illegal population, and how we can deal with the census in a situation of conflict or war. First, I think unless country has a reasonable peace or stabilization, it's difficult to conduct census. So that's why, as I displayed in my graph, on why expected peak period of the census being moving is because many countries couldn't conduct the census as scheduled, partly because internal conflicts or instability of the government and so forth. So the prerequisite of the having census in successful manner is that country has to be very stable. So, but if civil war or internal conflict occurred, we can't really have a census, We cannot send a census enumerator to the very dangerous area. So we have to postpone, and I have observed many countries, we couldn't have a census for many, many years. Some countries in Africa, and based on my personal experience, I was kind of an advisory board for the census in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And you know that Bosnia and Herzegovina was in a war state for a while after the dissolution of Yugoslavia. So for almost 25 years, they couldn't have any census. So it really made census planning operation very, very difficult to start from the scratch. But the government realized that without census, they don't even know what exact size of their population is at. So once country became stabilized, the very first effort they made is to conduct a census. The other countries like Afghanistan, again, still very, very unstable situation. So, but the data are very much needed. What they're doing is, instead of having a full count of population as a census, they are conducting so-called miniature census, or having a surveys by region to region, targeting mostly relatively safe area, and cover area, region A this year, region B next year, like that, to rotate. So this is kind of interim measure, temporary measure, but still helpful to get to know what the population is about. So it's challenging, but it's not impossible. There's some other way to understand the population. So I hope I answer to your question. How to deal with inconsistency? Inconsistency between censuses in a country, it cannot sometimes be avoided. Country situation changes, and also priority, the interest of the country, what they want to know from a census, changes over time. Like a situation in China, as you mentioned, until last census, Chinese government never caught foreign population in China because they didn't have to worry about it. Country was more or less closed for many, many years. There are very only handful number of the foreign people living in China. So there's no need for the government to capture. But now situation changed. The country opened economy to the outside world, and more foreigners coming in and staying in China. So definitely government felt the need to understand how many foreigners and what they're doing in China. So this is just an example, the type of the question and topic to be included unavoidably changes over time, each time. But therefore, I think UN always recommended core questions, which should be staying there each time when country conduct a census. So at least this core part of census questions should generate very fundamental information, which can be compared over time. And also how to capture immigration. As I mentioned, this is very challenging. And as you already has mentioned, if the whole household has moved out, there's no way we can capture. So in order to know the immigrants, immigration of household member, somebody from the family or household have to be present in a country where census is taking place. And so therefore, as I mentioned already, it's very challenging to get to know about real size of the immigration, real volume immigration from census. But still, the information we can obtain from that can be indicative to knowing the type, the nature of the immigration, why people left, and who exactly that are living, at the head of household or the young member of the family. So still, I think there's a value in it, in using it. And also how we see the household, because yes, household has its own lifespan. It changes in the size and also composition. But census is the statistical exercise to capture kind of like a snapshot. We're trying to capture the situation of family members at a given census date. But the notion of household and family may be different from what you think and what the authorities think. Even if, for instance, you have a step family or extended family living in different quarters, psychologically they are part of your family, but physically these two sets of family are living physically in a separate building. So what commonly do in the census is that when they plan for the census, one of the very first things they do is they do a mapping. And on the map, they really count the number of establishment, the number of the buildings, and apartments, and houses. That's the big start of the exercise. Then they put the number of each household, then send the census enumerator and try to count who live in there. So what I'm trying to do is, regardless of your mental or lineage or the notion of the family, is the base of the counting in census is the household, physical building or the unit that you can delineate from one to another. I hope I made it clear. And I think the last question, how to capture the migrants who are living temporarily outside or permanently, who knows it. In principle, a census should take place based on a de facto account. What it means is the people who are present in your household on the day of census. So the people, your family member who are currently working in elsewhere outside the country on the date of census should not, it may appear in the list of household, but their characteristics won't be asked in the individual's questionnaire. How to compare that information with the other data sources? There's some attempts to compare the information, let's say, collected in Bangladesh, and compare it with the information on Bangladeshi people living in, let's say, in the United States. And try to compare, not necessarily about magnitude, because always the size is very unreliable, but mostly about the characteristics, the people's socioeconomic status and so forth, to validate the information of each sources. So there's some attempts have been done it. But the good, important thing is that it's very, very important that two censuses, different censuses conducted by different countries shouldn't stay there. By comparing censuses from different countries and exchange of information, again, we can quite validate the quality of census information, and also we can really know a lot about the population who emigrated to the other countries. So again, United Nations is promoting, let's share the information, census information, more and more, especially among receiving countries and sending countries. So I hope I covered more or less.
Hi, I'm Kate. I work at the IOM GymDAC, and I had a question, just what you were saying at the end there, Keiko, about countries sharing their census data. And so is it the UN Stats Division that coordinates that, or are there examples of countries sharing their census data between them, or is it up to you to make that happen?
Thank you. Good morning. I have a question regarding the populations that countries do not want to have visible, and so censuses may be being used as a political tool as well. We've known of some groups of people, stateless people, not being registered in censuses in a variety of countries. So I was curious to hear about the way the UN is going about that in terms of recommendations and have them implemented. And also in terms of policy tool, what censuses can be useful for when it comes to promote access to birth registration, including for migrant population. Is there a correlation there, and how would you go about it? Thank you.
All right, thank you. The first question is if UN is leading the facilitating exchange of the information of the censuses. Not in a very explicit way. We've been advocating, whenever occasion arises. But as you see, it's very, very important information to be shared. And many countries voluntarily started doing that. And I know the example that between Canada and the United States, and they're doing the information exchange quite a bit. That's a country that come in my mind. But I think whenever we organize this kind of the workshop, and we see many countries coming to the meeting, we try to push them, make a network, and eventually they should start a communication, including data exchanges. So. Okay, the question about how to do with the population like stateless people, can I tell you my personal experience, because I was involved in the Myanmar census, Burma. Again, Burma was a country which didn't have a census for almost 30 years. Country had been closed quite a bit for a long time. And they couldn't have a reliable estimate of own population because they didn't have a census. So finally, they sought the assistance of international community how to do the census after 30 years. Being in very country like Myanmar, how to capture illegal migrant workers, and also the stateless population of the Rohingya was a very, very tough issue from very beginning. The government was reluctant at the beginning. Of course, they're stateless. The authority didn't want to recognize that the existence of Rohingya population in there, the border with the Bangladesh. But international community tried to convince against that this census is exercised to cover everybody present in that territory, even stateless people have to cover it. So it was quite challenging, but at the end, the government agreed that they should reach out to the stateless population. But what happened is that there's a kind of resistance from a certain population group to be counted. And they refused, actually. Some local leaders mobilized their voice and totally boycotted census. What we did is to compensate the loss of that population, we advised the government relied on the registry of the people who are registered with the UNHCR and all this international organization. Using that list, at least we could have a good head count, a rough estimate of the stateless population, and manage to add to the total count of the population in Myanmar. So just a example, but it's very, very challenging how to capture, ensure those invisible minority or stateless people, especially people who are in irregular situation, how to capture it. It's a challenge in everywhere, yeah.